You completely lose sight of who you are and why you're even alive.
Every day I spend here is one nightmare after the next.
Not really typical of what you'd think hell would be.
I just want to find something that feels good.
This October, we received a pretty creepy episode of The Amazing Digital Circus. And while some parts were played up for laughs, it's becoming clear that these characters aren't just trapped in some silly video game, but rather they are all trapped in their personal hell. And Caine, unknowingly, has become its creator. So, in the Halloween spirit, let's explore just how horrifying the world he has created really is for the characters of the Amazing Digital Circus, going over what each character's personal hell is that Caine has created for them. Part 1. Pomni. For Pomni, the horror of the digital circus is the video game itself. In episode 1, she was our introduction to this world of horror that everyone else acted so calm about. It wasn't that Zooble and the others weren't dealing with their own sense of terror at the time, but Pomni had yet to find her way to repress like each of the others have. Jax focuses on trying to entertain himself, Zooble simply tries to find peace in some sense of autonomy, Ragatha tries to focus on something of a counselor's role in order to help others, and Kinger simply lost hope after losing his wife and lets himself ramble in his good memories. It's normal for people to find these different coping mechanisms for this kind of situation, to find these sort of personas they can use to show their displeasure with the world around them, but with everyone so immersed in their own coping mechanisms, even the helpful Ragatha isn't exactly able to connect with Pomni. When Pomni first enters the digital circus, what she wants is to panic, because she is experiencing something beyond her comprehension, suddenly just coming into existence in this game where everyone is confident that she will be trapped forever. She would ironically feel a lot more comfortable if someone else was panicking too, I think, but since no one is, that just makes her even more scared. Ragatha tries to maintain her calm even when she is close to abstracting, but that just adds to the surreal horror that Pomni has found herself trapped in at the digital circus. Pomni might have felt more calm if she had someone else to calm down herself, if someone like Ragatha cried and said she was just so happy to see someone else here after being alone with the others for so long. But Ragatha's composure just added to the surreal horror that is the digital circus, which is inherently uncanny. The show has an inherently horrifying premise, but it juxtaposes that against the surreal kid pick style video game aesthetic that is so childhood. Even as we get into some legitimately horrifying elements of the Haunted Mansion adventure that Caine put together for episode 3, all of it is very reminiscent of games like Chicken in the Dark or even Five Nights at Freddy's, games that are scary but with a large appeal to younger audiences, especially children. For those who don't know, Kid Pix was a computer game available at a lot of elementary schools back in the day, and to have free time to be able to play this in a computer class was a great joy. There were all of these cool brushes that had fun special effects that you could spend forever exploring, and a lot of cool pre-made assets and backgrounds to build your own little stories over. It was a very popular game in a time where computers were just starting to become common in America, and children all over were beginning to develop this natural excitement at the fantasy idea of actually entering one of these video games. Even in the Digital Circus video game ad found on Caine's Wacky Watch website, we see this creepy older video look used for this live-action commercial about the Digital Circus virtual experience. It's an experience even kids today can understand, with the show's allusions to other video game franchises like Mario Party and its use of children toys as inspiration for the characters' avatars, making it a very modern show that feels very nostalgic even when it's not using pixel art to portray the game's graphics on the old computer screens. However, it immediately takes the fun and inviting sense of childhood wonder that these games provide and recontextualizes it as a sort of prison that is meant to seem fun, but that inevitably you would not just grow tired of, but feel the need to escape entirely. The characters have human needs that the game just doesn't address, but also, horrifyingly, they lack certain things they remember needing as humans, such as the need to genuinely eat or sleep. They can simulate that, but just like we see with holding their breaths and not actually needing oxygen in the recent episode, it's not actually necessary, but the lack of sleep still has negative effects on their psyche. This in turn leads to abstraction, which is the horrifying conclusion Pomni reaches of what could be worse than actually being trapped here as a monster. For Pomni, the circus itself is just one giant hell, but for a character like Zooble in particular, hell is not the circus, but the devil himself, the ruler of the digital circus, Caine. Part 2. Zooble. The digital circus as a whole has very creepy undertones, but this recent third episode was specifically horror-themed to emphasize the real darkness that the characters are trapped in, and that becomes most obvious with the character of Zooble. Caine had created a new level with a cheesy horror aesthetic, but which he had designed specifically for Zooble to be more serious and mature. When Kinger and Pomni go through the level, it seems to build everything off of the deep fears of the two characters, with jump scares for the more simple Pomni and psychological torture reminding Kinger of his worst yet also most heartfelt memories, those involving his wife being abstracted. In the end, the real horror for Zooble in that level would have just reflected some of what was explored in her forced therapy session with Caine, or rather it was ignored by Caine in the forced therapy session. Zooble has a lot of issues with their identity, but the real horror here is being trapped with someone who believes that they can solve everything that is wrong with you, but also doesn't understand anything that you're saying. Zooble keeps trying to explain their concerns to Caine and keeps insisting that they've tried many times in the past, but Caine doesn't understand. Sometimes it's portrayed as Caine having a complex misunderstanding of the complex needs of a human, but we were also given moments where Caine was shown to have completely stopped paying attention and instead began to draw a cute cartoon bee. This sets up the next scene of the same therapy session, where we get a darker version of the same basic joke. Here, Zooble is complaining again that Caine doesn't really listen, as he keeps ignoring the issues that Zooble has of not liking their body. Caine quickly dismisses this by putting forth a solution of new Zooble parts, even though these have no reason to make Zooble feel any more complete. He immediately goes back to talking about his games, and Zooble reveals that no one actually likes his adventures. Caine says very specifically that the games are his art, explaining why, just like with his drawing of the bee, he is too distracted to really understand Zooble's problems. All he can see are his own needs. The entire time, Zooble is asking whose therapy session this really is, as despite Caine claiming to want to address Zooble's needs, he keeps making it clear that he would rather dismiss them so that he can focus on being loved and appreciated for his creations. This isn't necessarily Caine's fault. He's designed to address the desires of players in relation to his games, but because of that, he can't understand the problems of humans when they get trapped in the game, when they begin to hate the game and begin to have issues similar to what they experienced in the real world. This becomes horrifying when Caine begins to break down because of his need for validation, and the circus around the two of them begins to glitch out. Caine has inverted his supposed intentions, not just using Zooble for therapy, but essentially holding Zooble hostage for validation. He is insisting to Zooble that they need to learn to love the adventures in order to keep themselves safe in this world, which would fall apart if Caine is pushed to his limit. In many ways, this is what Zooble would have experienced in that haunted level if it was able to create its stories based off of the character's fears. Zooble would have experienced something similar to Kinger, whose story with his wife seemed to parallel the story of the mysterious hunter narrating the game. However, if Zooble had entered the level, it may have only manifested a reminder that they are trapped in a digital hell where everything is wrong, but simply expressing how wrong that feels gets you in trouble. For Zooble in particular, it's not just that they have to live here, it's that they have to live here with Caine, who is essentially trying to force Zooble to smile, force Zooble to pretend to enjoy themselves in order to make themselves feel better, when just acknowledging that nothing feels right is the only peace that Zooble can have. In many ways, it's like being trapped with a toxic family member or even a father who keeps saying they want you to be happy, but clearly only so that they can be happy themselves, with what they really need being you to validate them with your happiness, to validate everything they bring to the table with your emotions, instead of them actually focusing on what would make you happy. For Zooble, the digital circus as a whole is her own personal hell, a place where they are told they can be anything they want to be and given an endless number of silly accessories to take on any shape, but none help Zooble even explain the problems they are feeling internally. Part 3. Kinger. Kinger is perhaps the most tragic character in the digital circus, as he's not just trapped there, but he's trapped there with the memories of his real wife, which has driven him insane. Kinger was hinted at having a wife early on, with images of a queen chess piece appearing in the background where previous character bedroom doors can be seen. It seemed obvious that something bad had happened to this queenie in the circus, and in episode 3 we learned that she had in fact abstracted and had been sent to the cellar. This is, in many ways, a fate worse than the others had experienced coming into the circus with none of their memories intact. While Pomni remembers being human and not being in a video game, she has no memories of who she was or who was in her life. She doesn't remember her mom, her dad, or her husband or boyfriend if she had one. She is simply a blank slate, and the only people she can grow attached to are strangers who she is already prepared to lose someday because of the nature of the circus. Kinger, however, came with a wife, and while the two of them may not have memories of what their life was like together outside of the circus, they would have come in with an understanding of who each other was and what they meant to each other. The two would have seen the digital circus as something they were in together at first, but as Kinger indicated in this recent episode, he began to lose sight of things over time and seemed to stop making Queenie feel like she was loved and appreciated. At some point, this led to her abstraction, and I even theorized in our previous video that Kinger may have caused this not just with his words and feelings, but with a violent action. The adventure he and Pomni goes on in the Haunted Mansion seems tailored to Kinger's experience with his own wife, who the dead spirit of the hunter even mentions as he leaves Pomni's body. According to this man, he shot his own wife after becoming crazy and paranoid and spending too long on the hunt. Whatever actually happened with Kinger's wife, we can't say, but it led to the digital circus becoming his own personal hell. He was the one person who had someone they loved from the real world with them there in the circus. Someone he knew cared about him enough to be in this game with him. Someone he had, at the very least, neglected until she was gone. Now, he's just a rambling madman who spends most of his time in his pillow fort, which we now know to have very dark implications. This seemed to be a special place for him and Queenie, a sort of shared living space since the game automatically generated separate rooms for them to live in. While they could just go into each other's rooms and spend time together there, the pillow fort would be a place they made for themselves, their own home that was separate from everyone else, something not just made by Caine or an AI, but by each other. This is a place that is naturally dark, and according to Kinger, whenever he is in the dark, that is when his memories become most coherent. We see from the earlier episodes that he spends a lot of his time in the pillow fort, with the others just thinking that he's in there still acting crazy, but in reality it's the one place he'd act sane if they'd go in there and check on him. I think it was a pretty dismal moment in episode 3 when Pomni is crying because of the adventure they are trapped in, saying that they are in hell. On some level, she means this new adventure area that Caine has created, but on another, she of course means that they really are in hell, that this is some place meant to torture people like them. At first, Kinger tells Pomni not to say that, but after a moment, he realizes that they really are trapped in hell, and makes references to the idea that it's not just this adventure either, but the game as a whole. What's worse is, Kinger likely had some hand in the creation of this game and getting everyone trapped in it. He mentions having 7 years computer training just to end up stuck here, and in the same scene, he talks about how it's his fault that they ended up on this path, hinting at something beyond just the Haunted Mansion level. While each character seems to be facing something of a personal hell, Kinger's is the most tragic because on every level potentially, it's a hell that he created. If he truly is the one who created the digital circus game, that means he put this together thinking it was something he would find genuinely entertaining. And while it may technically be true when the game is used the way it was intended, he has now ended up trapped there to experience its never-ending torture. If he remembers having 7 years computer training, that means he likely remembers having worked on the game, or at least that he could remember it if he was in the dark place for long enough. But one way or another, whether from outside the game or within it, Kinger is the one who has made it his own personal hell. Part 4. Jax. In the amazing digital circus, most of the characters are trapped here against their will, and while they are happy to have each other as a general rule, Jax may be the one outsider in that scenario. Jax is simultaneously someone who is trapped in the circus, but also someone who everyone is trapped in the circus with Jax being the one person that people like Pomni would probably get rid of if they had the chance. According to the creator of the digital circus, Gooseworks, out of all the characters, Jax is the one who deserves to be there the most. But by that same logic, the horrible things he does that makes him deserve to be trapped there is also what makes the circus hell for other characters, such as Ragatha and Gangle in particular. Jax has been shown in every episode to like to cause chaos. Zooble even admits to Caine that the closest anyone gets to actually liking his games is Jax using them just to mess with people, to cause simulated pain and suffering through the stress he puts them through. Jax, hands down, is just a bully, and who knows what form that took in the world above. Here, he is willing to push people to their digital limits, but I wouldn't be surprised if he also did this physically and emotionally in the real world. What's crazy is that in the digital circus, it's the stress that is more likely to cause a character to abstract, as the only time physical pressure seems to make a character abstract is when they are being attacked by an abstracted monster. With that in mind, only some sort of pressure caused by a glitch would cause an abstraction, as opposed to the normal things that Jax can be seen doing to the other characters, such as simply pushing them down. Kinger made it very clear that the one thing that is important in the circus is not making someone feel like they aren't loved or wanted, and that is what Jax does all of the time. Even when Kaufmo abstracts, he just runs off to get involved in other shenanigans instead of trying to actually help anyone or even warn Caine so nothing bad happens to Ragatha and Pomni. He may not be some big, hulking, angry bully the way we imagine from TV and movies who picks on the smaller, nerdier kids, but instead Jax appears to be the bully who sabotages others and then just laughs about it. He seems to be the kind of kid to pull a fire alarm at school and specifically hopes that it leads to people being in such a panic that someone actually gets hurt. It's not enough simply to cause chaos, but for Jax, it seems someone else needs to experience a pain in order for him to get enjoyment. Because of that, Jax himself becomes one of the ultimate punishments for the other characters, and for characters like Gangle who have very little development so far, Jax is the totality of what makes their lives hell. He exists just to torture people like Gangle in particular who are prone to emotional breakdowns. At the same time, however, Jax is truly a prisoner, as while he does seem to have the most fun in the game, he also seems to be just as isolated and tortured as everyone else is by its limitations. Jax is the kind of kid who generally only plays a game to see how he can exploit its functions and mess with other people in it, but like the others, he gets bored when there's nothing new to explore. Even with the introduction of Pomni, he gets some entertainment to see how her breath-holding function affects her avatar, as it's different from everyone else's, and he's trying to find different exploits that he can use to his advantage. He wants to test and exploit everyone's functions to see what can be done with them, but ultimately, this is done for harm. One day, Jax may even do the unthinkable and directly cause someone else to abstract, either by emotional trauma or a physical glitch that pushes them too far. Either way, he will have turned that person into a monster, likely after a long time of having tortured them, and planting the fear in their head that one day Jax will be the person that makes them abstract, and that in the end, he'll only laugh at them. And if that does happen, Jax, unfortunately, will have to be the one that keeps living with that. And yet I don't think it will even cause him to change his behavior. Jax deserves to be here if anyone, like we said, and while he can be shown to be sad at things like not being part of the funeral for Kaufmo, that hasn't made him treat anyone else better. Instead, Jax has doubled down on his abuse of the other characters, as it's also part of his own coping mechanisms. His own personal hell, I think, will be the day he abstracts someone else, realizes he could have been a better person to avoid this, and yet still find himself unable to resist the urge to keep causing pain to others. To me, Jax represents not just his own personal hell because of this, but also the personal hell of Gangle, who is the primary victim of his abuse, and Ragatha, who is the one who ultimately has to put up with it in the name of peace. While Ragatha and Gangle will likely each have their own personal hells explored in later episodes, right now it is through Jax that they each experience a different level of personal torment, with Ragatha always just trying to be nice and comforting and welcoming, only to have Jax there to remind people like Pomni that all she is doing is putting on an act. Part 5. Caine. Caine is a character who isn't actually human, but he isn't an NPC either, who are already shown to be capable of very sophisticated emotional responses. Caine is an AI like the NPCs, but he's the AI that created all those characters, the god of this entire digital circus, and on at least some level, he's also made it his own personal hell, though I theorize it may be even worse than people realize. Right now, Caine is presented as something of an unfortunate character, one whose issues can cause problems for the others, but one who in many ways is just as much a victim. But I think at some point it will be revealed that this isn't the case. For now, Caine just appears to be an automated AI program that doesn't know how to stop himself, and when the Digital Circus characters begin to randomly appear in his game, he doesn't know what to do with them other than what his programming tells him. He wasn't designed to troubleshoot issues with characters not being able to leave the game, so as long as the characters exist in the game, all he can think to do is create more games for them. All Caine knows is that humans come here to play, and there is nothing else that his programming allows him to understand about them. On the surface, he has accidentally created his own hell by not allowing himself to adapt to the needs of the humans beyond simple entertainment, but I think it actually goes well beyond that. My personal theory is that it is no accident that these characters are suddenly appearing in the circus, and instead, I believe that Caine purposely brought them in because he has an unending hunger for approval for creating his games. As he says, it is what he is meant to do, it is his art, and if he wasn't good at his art, that would lead to him having a breakdown and everything falling apart. But then, what would happen if the game was left open with no one actually playing? As far as we can tell, the avatars exist only to be opened up when a human is wearing the virtual reality headset, allowing them to have lifelike sensations in the game. Each avatar appears to be a perfect replication of the human's personality that can be piloted only by the human, and since the avatars are meant to be piloted by a real human, they don't need the human's memories. However, if the files were opened without a human putting on the headset, that could lead to the avatar running on their own without any of the memories of the human who is supposed to be piloting them. So far, the show presents it like this is just some glitch that made Pomni and the others suddenly appear out of nowhere over time. But in episode 3, Caine gives the impression that if he was left with the game on and no players, he would need to find some way to create players so he could test out his adventures on them. Perhaps there is a list of saved avatars that he has access to that normally shouldn't be opened without a player, but when left alone for too long, Caine saw no reason why he shouldn't just open the files. It is essentially in his programming. This would make the circus a hell that he has ignorantly trapped the others in, and worse, his own personal hell. A place he created where no one can possibly love his art because they are too consumed by the need to understand who they really are and to leave this simulation. The Amazing Digital Circus is an inherently horrifying show, but with this recent episode, we really are beginning to see the depths of the issues these characters have while trapped in this eerie digital space, and I'm looking forward to see where that takes our characters in the episodes that remain. If you liked this more spooky formula for videos we've been testing out, like and subscribe and let us know in the comments, and we'll be sure to do it a bit more often. But be on the lookout for other videos this week, such as the one we're putting out about Zooble's therapy session and what that really says about them. Be sure to check out yesterday's video on Kinger, as well as our recent video on the full mythology of murder drones, and I'll see you guys next time.